believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. Of course, I'm your host, Ricardo Randes, also known as Ricky Randes, and a great episode for you today. Today we have returning guest, journalist, author, thinker, researcher, and much more, Jack Roth. He comes on to talk about his JFK book because, of course, right around the corner is the JFK assassination. I don't know when you're listening to this, but I'm glad I can get this out for the 60th anniversary of the JFK assassination. It's crazy. It's been 60 years. I've done so many episodes on this topic with so many great researchers like Russ Baker and James DiEugenio, Jeff Marley, Abraham Bolden, who is a JFK whistleblower, also the first African-American on a presidential detail handpicked by JFK. He's a historical figure and also the author of The Echoes from Dealey Plaza. I've also had other great researchers on the show to talk about JFK, like Larry Hancock, who did a roundtable discussion with other researchers on episode 170 of the Ripple Effect podcast, and also Lamar Waldron, who's written many books on the JFK assassination. And these are all important figures in uncovering the story. I mean, for example, Jeffrey Marley was one of the people who sued the government to declassify the JFK assassination files. James DiEugenio was one of the researchers that helped with the JFK movie and a lot of the Oliver Stone work, including his new documentary. And I've had other great guests on who have scratched the surface of the topic, like Chuck Orcelli, Ryan Dawson, Roger Stone, who came on to talk about the LBJ connection to the assassination, and also Jesse Ventura. So if you're a fan of the JFK assassination story, or you just want to learn more about it, go on my website or go on Rumble or Rockfin or BitChute or any of the many platforms I'm on. Look up the Ripple Effect podcast, put in JFK or Roger Stone or Jesse Ventura or James DiEugenio, and search some of the great conversations that I've had with these great researchers. And also get the new book by Jack Roth about the topic called Killing Kennedy, Exposing the Plot, the Cover-Up, and the Consequences. And there were many consequences. That's why continuously talking about this topic is important and why I continue to do so. But before we get into this amazing conversation, let me remind you this is a Value for Value show. If you get some value out of these amazing guests and conversations I bring to you, please consider giving some value back. I know it's the holiday season, so money can be tight, but because it's the holiday season, sometimes people are also extra generous. But like I always remind you guys, giving value back doesn't just mean financially giving some value back. You can rate the show, review the show, whatever platform you listen to or watch the Ripple Effect podcast. I'm sure there is a method of thumbs upping or subscribing. So do all that and it'll help fight back against the algorithms that are suppressing conversations and shows like these. But if you're in the holiday spirit and you can financially support the show, please consider doing so to keep this project expanding. Much like my listeners, life is very busy and very crazy and very expensive. So any help I can get, no matter how little, is very much appreciated. And you can support us on Patreon. And for as little as $1 a month, if a small percentage of the listeners and watchers of the Ripple Effect podcast donated as little as $1 a month, I could easily do this job full time and do something I love for a living. So if you can, please contribute to that goal and to that dream. And there's other ways of also supporting the show. Like I said, you can support us on Patreon, but you can also send a one-time donation to our PayPal account. You can send a one-time donation to our Venmo account. You can also send crypto to our crypto wallet. We also have a merch store. So if you want to get some hoodies, t-shirts, kids' clothes, stickers, and much more, go to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com, or you can find all these links on my website and in the show description. We have awesome colors, awesome logos. The stuff is really inexpensive. It ships quickly and it's high quality stuff. So please check out the merch store. But other ways of also supporting the show is checking out our sponsors. The first one being Content Safe. Content Safe is how I get my video episodes on all the platforms I'm on. I upload to one location and he syncs all my channels together. So he saves me tons of uploading time. Matt from Content Safe also runs my website. So if you have any IT questions, any IT help that you might need, if you're a streamer, YouTuber, podcaster, contact Matt at Content Safe. Let him know you're a listener to Ripple Effect Podcast and he'll definitely take care of you. The next sponsor is the University of Reason, created by my dear friend, Richard Grove, who is one of the smartest people I've ever met. Definitely check out the archives and check out past conversations with Richard Grove, or check out his podcast called the Grand Theft World Podcast, which he streams every Sunday for a ridiculously long amount of hours, typically 6 to 7, sometimes 8 hours. So it's definitely worth watching. He does deep dives in all the current events and historical events that led to current events and geopolitical issues and much more. And Richard is a OG in the alternative media community, and he created something that he felt the alternative media needed, and that's some alternative education. It's a great option for people who are stuck. They're at a crossroads in life. They feel like they don't know what they want to do or how they want to get out of the hole that they're in. Maybe you want to connect with a freedom-minded, liberty-minded community. Check out Richard. Check out the University of Reason. Use the links in the show description, and hopefully you can help yourself and help the Ripple Effect Podcast at the same time. But please always use the links in the show description or on my website when you're interested in any of these sponsors. That way you can get the amazing service or product that you're looking for, but you're also helping a podcast you enjoy. The last sponsor is Element Electrolytes. It's the only sponsor I use on a daily basis. I drink this stuff all the time. It keeps me in ketosis. It keeps me in the fasting state. I eat once a day, so I need something with flavor to stay hydrated, but I also need something healthy. And Element Electrolytes is the perfect product for gym rats like myself or athletes like myself who love to play sports. And when you're depleted of hydration and you need to hydrate quickly, water is not enough. Water will get hydration into your blood, but you're still dehydrated until you get that hydration into your tissue. And the best way of doing that is with magnesium, potassium, and a lot of sodium. Salt is an essential mineral. It's the secret to stopping cramping, muscle fatigue, and really optimizing your body and mind. Element Electrolytes has no artificial colors, no artificial flavors, no artificial anything. It only has the things you need and none of the stuff you don't. It was created by an OG in the health and nutrition community, somebody that I've been following for many, many years. His name is Rob Wolf. He's a past guest of this show. He's also a past guest on tons of major shows like Joe Rogan and many others. He was one of the first people to be a best-selling author writing on the paleo diet. He's also one of the people who made CrossFit popular in the US and I believe opened the first CrossFit gym. So he knows athletes, he knows sports, he knows nutrition, and most importantly, he knows sports nutrition. And he knows what your body needs to perform its best. And if you need more information on Element Electrolytes, of course, like I mentioned, always use the links in the show description or on my website to get to the products or services. But use those links, and on that website, you're going to find a lot more info about the importance of salt, the importance of these specific electrolytes, and how the amounts that are in Element Electrolytes is exactly what you need to really optimize your body and mind. Because there's tons of electrolyte drinks out there, but they don't have enough of the ingredients to really make a difference. Dosage is important. And many of them have sugar or artificial sweeteners, and Element is sweetened with the stevia leaf. Please use the links in the show description or on my website and get a free gift with every purchase and support the Ripple Effect Podcast while staying hydrated. They also have chocolate and mocha and tons of other great flavors that go awesome with coffee. So you can drink your coffee, drink something warm while getting your electrolytes, which is crucial because coffee will dehydrate you. And that's it. Enjoy this amazing conversation with author, journalist, researcher Jack Roth, and I will see you on the next one. Peace.
I've always been a writer. I've always loved writing. I got my journalism degree quite a while back, and I've always just written. I've written for magazines, newspapers, and started doing some other types of writing, and then got into books. And part of it was because of some of the documentary work that my partners and I were doing as part of the film stuff that we do. And it just what happens is you start going down rabbit holes. And I've always been what I call, and it's a common term, but critical thinker. But I think it's it keeps coming up over and over again in these interviews, especially when it comes to the JFK assassination, because you have to think critically. So, I'm writing these books, and I always wanted to write something about the Kennedy assassination. I did a lot of research. I was always intrigued by it from the time I was an early teenager. I felt there was something off, something rotten in the state of Denmark, if you will, when it came to the Kennedy assassination. For me, it was because Jack Ruby. It was because Jack Ruby so easily was able to kill Oswald before Oswald went to trial. And at that moment, for me, it was a conspiracy. And quite frankly, it was at that point. The minute Ruby killed Oswald, you knew there was a conspiracy, some kind of conspiracy. You weren't quite sure what, but you knew that there was more than one person involved. So, and yet it seemed covered up. It seemed like it was glossed over. So it bugged me. And I'm that kind of person. That's who I am. And it's probably the same reason you do your show, right? It's the kind of person you are. You're looking for the truth. You think the truth is important. So COVID hit a couple years back, and I was like, I was talking to a buddy of mine who lives in England. I'm like, yeah, I really want to write a book on JFK assassination. And this might be a good time to do it. And he's like, well, ask yourself this: what kind of book can you write on the JFK assassination that hasn't already been written? And it was to test me. It was a great question, because I'm like, you know what? You're right. There's been 1,000 books written on the JFK assassination. So we started noodling ideas and these concepts of the ripple effects, and it still matters, and the cost of conspiracy. These types of things kept coming up over and over again. So I thought, you know what? What I would love to do, because I'm a journalist. I do interviews. I know how to do interviews. So, and you have to ask the right questions. So I said, what if I interviewed 20 people, 30 people, and put together a book based on specific people, obviously chosen specifically for the research they're doing or whatever, the fact that they knew Oswald or involved one way, shape, or form with the Kennedy assassination. And I said, I can get fresh perspectives, ask the right questions, and ask specifically everyone, what have been the ripple effects? Why does it still matter? All these things. I, interview PhDs, academics, people who teach college courses on things associated with this. So I said, you know what, this is what I want to do. And that is different, because basically what I wanted to do is interview these people. The hardest part for me was editing down 20,000 word interviews into 4,000 or 5,000 words and make them, cohesive and compelling. But I do that for a living. So I was good with that. And again, it was COVID. Everything was online. I was doing the interviews online, and the journey, that 2-year journey, was amazing for me. I learned more than I ever thought I could ever learn. I thought I knew a lot about the Kennedy assassination. I knew I didn't know everything, for sure, but I learned a lot. And then the book, it started to take shape, and I was like, you know what? It's a good book. This is going to be a good book, because I was getting the right interviews. One interview led to another. And because I was asking the right questions and I was approaching it the right way, people were like, absolutely, I'll talk to you. So, and then of course, the finished product, I couldn't be happier with, because I think it accomplishes what I wanted to accomplish, which is I want people to think. I want people to read the book and then go out and do their own research. So with that being said, I think I accomplished that, because I want people to think critically about this. And it might be one chapter, one person that I interviewed that really gets them going. It's like, you know what? I need to find out more about the blank. I need to find out more about the grassy knoll, or I need to find out more about the autopsy, or I need to find out more about Lee Harvey Oswald, and so was the goal of that. And I think that it's being accomplished. And for that reason, I'm really, really happy about it.
Well, the thing about conspiracy theories that always seems interesting to me is that a lot of times there'll be something that just, if you're a critical thinker, like you said, doesn't make sense. But because it will lead to you having to believe there was a conspiracy going on, you dismiss it. And when you look at like the Jack Ruby thing, like absolutely. I mean, you have Oswald saying, in on video that he was a patsy. You had, things that made zero sense, like the fact that the president just got shot, but the police were concerned about Oswald sneaking into a movie theater. Like didn't make any sense. You look at like Jack Ruby admitting on video that this goes to the highest levels, and eventually, so you have JFK who dies in a mysterious way, then you have Oswald who dies, then you have Jack Ruby who allegedly gets vaccinated or something in prison and ends up dying, and it's like, like people are just like, yeah, I think Oswald did it. And I'm just like, how? Like you have to throw all critical thinking aside. But it almost, that's why the Occam's razor thing like is frustrating, because it's like it's not always the simplest explanation. And typically, like, like that philosophy doesn't fit in many of these events. And when you look at it, like you have to throw all critical thinking out the window. You have to, if your purpose is to just find the information to help kind of back your already established opinion on the event. And the truth is, like, most people think that they look at the facts and then they come to a conclusion. But the truth is, like, people have a conclusion and then they look for the facts to back that conclusion. And and the thing about the JFK assassination, like many conspiracy theories like 9/11 or whatever, there's so much infighting with, like, if your theory on what happened is different than somebody else's theory, instead of us focusing on the bigger picture, we end up fighting among ourselves. And did you find a lot of that? Like a lot of people were very tribalistic with what their personal theory was on what happened.
Yeah, I was told by this one lady, she's mentioned in the book, and she's actually in one of the chapters of the book, and she puts on a lot of the conferences, and she's involved. She goes to everything JFK related. And she told me, she helped me a lot at the beginning to connect with certain people who then connected me with other people. And she said to me, you're about to enter the JFK assassination community and be ready. I'm like, why? Because nobody agrees on anything. And I'm like, really? And she's like, yeah, not so much that people hate each other. And that's when human nature gets in the way. That's when ego gets in the way. And I think that's played a part in why they were successful in covering it up, because they understand human nature. Listen, first of all, we're all guilty of what you said. As much as we try to be objective, we have a certain understanding in our heads, a paradigm that suggests. I went into this thinking I knew enough to know that absolutely Oswald was a patsy. And as it turned out, after doing all the work, all the more research and writing the book, I obviously believe that even more now. Do I know for sure? I could say it with 98% certainty, but I tell people I wasn't there. I wasn't behind the grassy knoll. I wasn't on the 6th floor of the depository. Unfortunately, I didn't see it with my own eyes, so I can't tell you for sure. But there is the point you just made is so critical to this, because in the book, I have an entire section dedicated. I interviewed two psychologists, a psychiatrist, a psychologist. I interviewed a philosophy professor, and then I interviewed another PhD who's a political science. But what I wanted to do is get their opinions based on their background and their skill sets and their understanding. And my question was this: why, if a Jack Ruby right there on national television comes out and kills Oswald, all these weird things are happening, then we're told about this magic bullet theory that could be the most ridiculous theory ever put out there in the history of mankind, right? And all these things don't fit. The Warren Commission is obvious it was a whitewash because Alan Dulles was on it. All these things, you go on and on. Why is it so difficult for people to even consider that it was a conspiracy and that there were other people involved, and it very well could have been part of our government and the CIA? And they all started talking about things like cognitive dissonance, how there are a lot of World War II guys, right? And we were the good guys back then, right? And we defeated the Nazis, and these guys were battle veterans. It was so hard for them to believe and consider that our government would do something like this, that it was much easier for them to just say Oswald did it. It was easier on the American conscience to just say Oswald did it. He was one guy. He was disgruntled. He was a communist sympathizer. Done. It was too uncomfortable to think otherwise. And that is a big deal. And when people don't realize we're all humans, so we tend to think in certain ways. Do you think I would sleep a lot better at night not having done all this research, not having convinced myself that, oh my God, basically the CIA and other cold warriors within the US government killed Kennedy, and all the other things I found out as a result of looking into it? But I don't sleep as well because I realize, as uncomfortable as it is, that our government is like most, if not all other governments, in that they don't wear the white hats. They don't. Do we do some good things? Yes, of course. Do we do some really bad things? Yes, we have. We did, and we still do, and we'll most likely continue to do that in the future. So that's hard for people to wrap their heads around.
So yeah, and the thing is, a lot of times when people talk about these events and these obvious examples of shadow governments, corruption, conspiracy, everybody talks about it like it's past tense, like it's not happening now, like this is something that used to be and isn't anymore. Now, from your research and you analyzing this, and I'm sure you seeing parallels between history unfolding now and what you've read and researched and learned, is it past tense? And how similar is our government and the CIA and these operations and the people behind the scenes pulling the strings? How much of that is still going on?
Yeah, it's not past tense. And you could take this back. I take it back to the Julius Caesar assassination, basically trying to make a point that since the beginning of human civilizations, there's been conspiracy, corruption, and cover up. I call it the 3 C's, and I talk about it in the opening because I felt like it was critical for people to understand that it's not an isolated incident. This has been happening throughout the history of humankind. And again, it's because of human nature. So you have all it takes for corruption is corruption, and it could occur on many levels. It can occur on, listen, if I am 5 years old and I go into the kitchen and I steal a cookie from the cookie jar and then pretend I didn't, and when asked if I did, say I didn't, I'm covering it up. Right? I know that's a very low example, but human nature. This is what we do, right? And corruption is seen at all levels of government from the beginning of time, and it still exists probably more now than ever. And because they've been allowed to get away with it. And when governments know they can get away with it, like when Kennedy was assassinated and they got away with it, and I don't know at which point in time they said, hey guys, we got away with this. There's no way. We control the media. We're threatening the life out of people who might have seen something that we didn't want them to see. We control it. We have total control. And with the Warren Commission, we're good to go. And at that point, they're like, What else can we do? And that's what happened to the CIA during that time period, because the CIA was getting away literally with murder, overthrowing democratically elected leaders, leading coups d'etats. The things they were doing all over the world were ridiculous, because that their mandate was simply to collect foreign intelligence. Well, they were doing a lot more than collecting foreign intelligence. So, I feel like it's always there. The three C's are always there. And conspiracy, all conspiracy is, people get all bent out of shape when that word now, because conspiracy theory, right? That phrase. Well, guess who came up with that phrase? The CIA. And they came up with it when the Warren Commission came out, and people were they were like, wait a minute, the Warren Commission, this doesn't make any sense. People were reading it. They're like, nah, I don't know about this. They came out with a memo, and in the memo said anyone who goes against the Warren Commission report should be labeled a conspiracy theorist. And that should be labeled as a negative term, a derogatory term. And guess what? It started with Dan Rather and Peter Jennings, and they had the media on their side, mainstream media, and it's worked. They're good at what they do. So now when you say, but all it takes is a conspiracy is for two people to plan together something that benefits them, right? So we're going to conspire. Again, I take this back to middle school. Two girls in a playground conspire to make another girl look bad because they're jealous of her looks or something. That's a conspiracy. Again, low level. But my point is, you could take that all the way up to the Kennedy assassination, where it's like the highest levels of government, the highest levels of power that were involved in this. And that was one of the ultimate conspiracies, not a theory, but a conspiracy that was covered up. And within that cover up and the conspiracy, there was all types of corruption going on anyway. And corruption. And you mentioned Alan Dulles and his brother, and, Guatemala in the 1950s, and that coup in Guatemala. Well, guess what? The Dulles brothers own millions of shares of the United Fruit Company. And when the democratically elected leader was elected in Guatemala, he wanted the U.S. out. He's like, we don't want United Fruit Company here. We want to be a sovereign nation. No, because there was so much money being made, and there was no way they were kicking the United Fruit Company out of Guatemala. So the Dulles brothers and others planned the coup through the CIA, obviously. And he was he was ousted. Many people were killed, like 100,000. Innocent people were killed because of that coup. Do you think Alan Dulles and John Foster Dulles cared? No, because they were making $1 million on the stock. So there you go. We can go on and on about this, but that's why it's important to look at the entire story. Look at the times in which Kennedy was living, right? The height of the Cold War when he comes into power. And this made a difference. The people that were around him, he literally did walk into a viper's den. And that's important for people to understand.
Yeah, it's recently I had Ralph Blumenthal on, who is an author, and we brought up the term conspiracy theory, and he brought up, like, a lot of times people would talk and people would say, and it's like, I've heard that over and over again. And the JFK assassination is a perfect example of people do talk. In every conspiracy theory, if you go down these rabbit holes and you do some research and you spend some time looking into it, you will find whistleblowers, you will find people who had mysterious deaths, you will find people who wanted to testify that they kind of just were erased from the history books, and over and over again. So this idea that, like, oh, if it was a conspiracy, we would have heard something, somebody would have spoke. It's like, in many cases they do, right?
They do. And there are what I like to call courageous people. And there were actually courageous journalists and actually citizen journalists, people who were just ordinary citizens, and they became researchers and they wrote books because they knew objectively and as critical thinkers that this was not right. There was more to it, and we were being lied to, and something was being covered up. And it was at the highest levels, because we talk about the ripple effects, and that's a separate little conversation. But these people, they were courageous and they did try to change things. And they were the kind of people that if two guys in suits came up to them and said, you saw this, and you're like, no, I didn't, I saw this. And they're like, no, you think you saw that, but you saw this. Well, guess what? There are some people, probably like you and me, who are like, nope, I know what I saw. Now, whether we were run off the road the next week in a car accident or had some kind of, unfortunate accident that we were dead, there you go. But if you look at it and really look at all the unexplained, mysterious deaths associated directly with the Kennedy assassination, yes, people had heart attacks in their 40s and 50s back then, especially men. Yes, it did happen. But a journalist getting karate chopped out in his shower, who was he was one of the ones asking the questions that they didn't want asked, and he's karate chopped. That screams assassin to me. Right? Where it's like, come on, again, common sense that he was killed. He was shut up. Dorothy Kilgallen, same thing. Mary Pinchot Meyer. There's all these examples of women as well. They didn't care who they killed. They were going to shut people up who they thought were a threat to the secret, so a threat to the cover up. And it's sad, but listen, and again, look at history. Do you think this was different in the Roman Empire or the Greek Empire or the Egyptian Empire? You start calling the oldest story in the world. Well, not the oldest, but the most famous is Jesus, the life of Jesus, right? So Jesus is a rebel rouser. Jesus is against the high Jewish priests and the Roman Empire. He was a threat to authority. He was a threat to the powers that be, right? He used to talk about the ills of money. That's one of the things he preached about the most. People don't realize that. And he was a major threat. So they crucified him. They vilified him and crucified him in a horrible crucifix. You can't get worse than crucifixion. So they took him out, basically. Anyone who's ever a threat to authority and power has a problem on their hands, because that authority and that power will do anything to maintain that authority and that power and wealth that comes with it. That goes hand in hand with it.
It is funny how, for some weird reason, Christians, the most like hardcore capitalists, are Christian. And I'm just like, you can't be a hardcore Christian and be a hardcore capitalist, because it seems like it doesn't make sense. Like, it just
No.
Jesus, I'm not sure, was a capitalist by any.
No. It just, you can't. You're right. You can't justify it. It's like if you look at the historical record, forget about the biblical record, historical record of what we do know about the life of Jesus, right? Whether you believe he was man, God, son of God, whatever. It was a guy, let's say he was this dude that living back then, and he was the ultimate rebel rouser. He really was. He had done all the work. He'd done the work. He was really educated in the ancient mystery schools. That's what he was doing all those years. He knew what was up, and he knew what he was preaching about was important. And he was not a capitalist. He was very much about, we all love each other. We're all God, right? We all have God in us. You're right. And then, but things get twisted like everything else, and there's been a lot of years there for it to get twisted. So you're talking 2,000 years. That's a lot of years to twist something. So it's tough. It's hard. It's like the signal in the noise. You have all this noise. And especially today, we have all this noise, right? All these news networks and all this stuff out there. Where's the signal, the real signal in that noise? How do we find it? And I think the best we can do is just dig in, put on your critical thinking caps, put on your free thinking caps, do the work, try to come to as an objective solution as you can. Being human, I know it's very difficult, but try to put something out there that at least other people can take and run with and say, you know what? And it comes down again to the truth being important.
It's funny because the way you described Jesus almost sounds like he was the original JFK, the guy who
Yeah.
did a little too much and wanted to disrupt the hierarchy. And it's kind of
Mm.
I mean, I'd never even thought about it that way until, just now. And I'm like, there is some parallels to the stories. And they
Yeah,
both could have been murdered for the same reasons, or at least
they
similar.
were they were martyrs. When if you really think about it. Now, am I comparing JFK to Jesus? No. All right, certainly I wasn't there 2000 years ago. I wasn't there in 1963. And fact of the matter is, I tell people this. JFK was a flawed man. He wasn't perfect by any means. He was a serial philanderer. I mean, he had real issues with remaining faithful to women. Trust me. He was bad, and that stemmed from his family and his mother and everything else. So he had those issues, no question about it. But what he did have, he had courage. And we knew this because that was proven in World War II. He was a hero. He was courageous. He saved someone's life. That's the real deal, right? So that's real courage. And when he saw what was happening once he got in office, and he's saying, "My God, I'm surrounded by warmongers. They want to drop the bomb on Cuba and anywhere else, and they don't care about collateral damage." They did not care. And he realized this between the Bay of Pigs, the Cuban Missile Crisis, what was going on in Vietnam, all of this, the CIA's interference in these third world countries in Africa and Central America, where they took away their sovereignty. And all they wanted to do was exploit these countries for money and make fortunes on these countries. And Kennedy, if you look it up, he wanted all African nations to have sovereignty. He didn't want the US to be involved. Certainly not the way the CIA was, and then manipulation. So Kennedy saw this, and he realized what he had walked into in 1961. And he's like, you know what? And he went to his brother, Bobby, who was also a powerful guy, attorney general, and they thought they had more power than they did. Presidents have a certain amount of power, but they don't have the kind of power that the people we're talking about here have. And you're talking about extremely powerful families and interests and institutions that have basically been running this country since the robber barons in the 1800s. These are the same families. And it's a very elitist kind of mentality that goes along with it. Allen Dulles recruited from almost exclusively from Harvard and Yale for the CIA. It was Ivy League. And they all came from these very prominent families. It was a rare occasion where someone was from the outside that came in and helped, or was it with the CIA, unless they had a real specific skill set. But that's the Bushes. That's the Bush family. And it's literally Skull and Bones, all these secret societies. These go back a long time. These people take elitism very seriously, right? So, they're not going to let an upstart Catholic and his bootlegger father destroy what they've built. This guy has to be taken care of. And they felt justified in doing it, and in doing it the way they did. And that's when you realize what you're up against and the people you're dealing with here. Then you realize, oh God, that's a little terrifying. Thanks, Jack. I won't sleep tonight, but it's true.
Yeah, people forget that when JFK was running, people thought that, a Irish Catholic becoming president was going to be, the end of the America, that the Catholic Church was going to run America, and this was dangerous and all this stuff. Like there was, it's obviously that seems like a long time ago, but at that time, in those moments, like the people were afraid of this outsider kind of winning and becoming president. And he did have charm, and he did, it's funny because it's seeing so much about his background, it almost seems like coming from money and having a family that did have resources and whatnot, that maybe he, like, I feel like it can have two effects on a person. Either one, you also get obsessed with money, or two, you almost seem like, okay, well, this stuff isn't really important. I'm looking for a greater good. I'm looking for a something deeper in life. And JFK seems to have that type of mindset where some of his speeches, and I know it's been analyzed by many different people, and people will have different interpretations on what he's referring to and whatnot, but it definitely seems like he was subconsciously putting in the conscious of the American population that there is something going on behind the curtain, and he's trying to almost indirectly tell you that he's trying to put an end to it, and he sees that there's a danger that maybe most American people, because I mean in the moment of that famous speech, like I'm curious that if the American people understood the significance of it or how important it was, or it's kind of like the Eisenhower speech, like maybe at the moment they didn't understand what he meant or the grave danger that he was warning you about. And what's your interpretation of that speech, and what do you think he was referring to in many of those parts of that speech where it seemed like he was referring to a shadow government and some things behind the scenes?
Yeah, he was absolutely calling them out outright. And when you think about even what Eisenhower said, it was pretty clear what he said, right? It wasn't this riddle, right? It was like, yeah, it's military industrial complex. We got a problem here, and it started after World War II. We got a bit of a problem. The U.S. intelligence community is out of control, and Eisenhower's like, I can't control them at all. I have no control. And Kennedy came in. What's really fascinating about JFK is that he evolved. I spoke to people and I did a lot of research on, Kennedy. And when I was writing the chapter on Mary Pinchot Meyer, that Peter Janney wrote that book, Mary's Mosaic. And it's about Mary Pinchot Meyer, who knew the Kennedys. She was from a prominent family in the Northeast, same, kind of, powerful, wealthy family. And when JFK was young and in college, he was as shallow as they get. He was all about girls. Family had money, privilege, total privilege. And he acted as such. He was one of those guys. And then things started to change for him. And I think he went into the war. He saw some things. He experienced some things. And for whatever reason, and I know there's been entire books written about this. I'm not an expert on this, but the Kennedy family always felt that they had to be civil servants. It was different with the Kennedy family. Yes, they had money, but maybe because the father, they always felt like outsiders because they were Catholic and he was a bootlegger. Not to say that these other robber baron families, they were all criminals, but to them, that was okay. But, Joseph Kennedy was a criminal. And he was a bootlegger. But for some reason, they always had this sense of civic duty, the Kennedys, and they still do. They still do. And so Kennedy, he gets into office, and at the time he gets elected, he's kind of a hawk. He's hawkish. He agrees, that communism is the biggest threat. We got to get rid of them, etc. But as you see, as he goes through his presidency and these things happen, Bay of Pigs, he knows the CIA is manipulating him into a war, and possibly a nuclear war. Cuban Missile Crisis. Whoa. Tens of millions of Americans could have been killed in 5 seconds if that things would have worked a little differently there. And it was at this point he realizes, I got to talk to Khrushchev and do whatever I can, even if it's backdoor, to try to ease these tensions. And he did. That's when him and Khrushchev developed a really strong personal relationship, because they both knew this wasn't going to end well for any of these people, for any of the people. So they started to do that. And you see in his speeches, and it was American University speech, he comes right out and says it. Shadow government, whatever the words he used, like, yeah, these elitists, the secret societies. I mean, he's saying it right there. And I think that could have been the final nail in his coffin. Although I think his assassination was already in the works. And maybe he realized, listen, I've already made enemies. These guys are always going to be my enemies. I might as well go for it. And it was a beautiful speech. It's one of the most eloquent, beautiful speeches. If people haven't listened to it or heard it, please do so. The man was an orator of the first order. He was amazing. He had a lot of phenomenal qualities, and but he changed. I tell people he was our last chance for world peace. He had some influences in his life, including Mary Pinchot Meyer, who talked to him about, as a friend, like, John, this is not going to end well. Nuclear war, really? And these guys, because she was married to Cordmeyer, who was in the CIA, and he was crazy, right? And at that point he was, because he was under Allen Dulles' and James Angleton's tutelage. And Kennedy realized that we have to change things. And perhaps he thought that he had more power than he did and he would be able to do it. And he learned the hardest way. And I think Robert also learned the hardest way, that these people, at least at that point and probably still at this point, cannot be messed with. They'll kill you, and there's nothing you can do about it.
Now, do you see any similarities with Trump and JFK in regards to maybe pissing off some part or some people involved with the shadow government, that just people behind the scenes? He seems like he has poked at them, and in similar ways that JFK did, or seems to be fearless in a way that other presidents haven't been, in regards to kind of not being afraid of the CIA, not being afraid of those type of people involved. Like, what's your thoughts? Are there any similarities, or am I looking too deep into it?
Yeah, I think you have to look at the men, and I think the similarity would be, yeah, if you want to piss off the CIA, talk about the CIA like that. And if you're president or going to become president and you're talking about the CIA and the FBI like that, you're going to anger them, but for whatever reason you're doing it. But what I tell people is, and again, I didn't know JFK personally. I don't know Donald Trump personally, but here's the difference. The difference is that at some point in Kennedy's presidency, he truly cared about the American people, and he cared about all people. He cared about the world. He cared about, wait a minute, what's going on in Africa? People need sovereignty, right? People need to be free and live and not be controlled. So I feel like Kennedy sincerely cared about Americans without question, and also human beings. And I think he did things unselfishly at that point because he didn't need anything else. And for him, it was like, you know what? I'm going to go for this. I am going to poke the bear because the bear needs poking. This might anger some of your listeners, but I don't see Donald Trump that way. I see Donald Trump as an opportunist. I see him as almost like a megalomaniac, from the standpoint that he thinks that he's untouchable. That it's like, I could say whatever I want about anyone. But he's learning now. I mean, not the same way Kennedy did. You don't do that. And it's not that you shouldn't do that, right? It's not that you, like, everyone, we should be able to criticize our leaders, right? But there was so much more going on there with Trump. See, I grew up in New York, and from the time I was a little baby, right, from a kid, we knew about the Trump family. We knew about the shenanigans with Atlantic City and the things they would do with their buildings. And they were shady characters back then. And I'm talking about his father, right? And then him, and then, eventually now his kids. I don't think, and again, there are people not going to be happy with this, but we have to understand that Trump is the perfect distraction for the people with real power. And I think that when Trump became president, like a lot of people, when they become president, they're like, I'm president, do whatever I want, right? And then you have that meeting, and then you have that little behind doors, closed doors meeting, transition meeting. And it's like, yeah, I tell people they probably show every incoming president the Zapruder film and say, this too could be you if you don't do exactly what we say. So you have all these campaign promises, and you could, depending on your personality, you're going to act out. You're going to be bolder. You're going to be like, you know what? Nope. I'm going to rip these people. But to what end? And I think that I don't want to say, I tell people, and this is important, and I appreciate you bearing with me on this. At this point, it's not a question of Republican, Democrat, someone being conservative or liberal. It's not about that because they want us to fight over that stuff. They want us to fight and argue and want to kill each other, basically. And who was the perfect person to get us to that point was Trump. And so now we're ready to strangle each other in the streets. And guess who's laughing? All the way to the bank, all the way to their castles and their their security gates and their gated, mansions. It's these high elite people who really run things and are like, let them divide and conquer. And I tell people, let's get past this. Let's get past this so we can clearly see who the real people are, the culprits, if you will, the real problem. And that is this elite class of human beings who could care less about other human beings. And this, you could see it. You saw it in why Kennedy was killed. This was one of the reasons why Kennedy was killed. And I know that's going to cause a little stir up with listeners, but I have to tell it the way I feel it. And yeah, I don't see the comparison. I think JFK was. I don't think Donald Trump is 1/100th of the man JFK was. Not even close. And I think JFK was the better man, the more courageous man. And but again, we see what we see, we hear what we hear, and we make those determinations based on what we believe and what we want to believe. I'll leave it at that.
Yeah, it's well, they're definitely not, exact similarities by any stretch of the imagination. There are some similarities in regards to maybe their love of women or maybe
yeah, they both had that sense of entitlement, right? That comes from growing up that way. When you grow up with a sense of entitlement where you're like, you can have anyone you want, and if you need to rape them, who cares? Right? This is what we're dealing with. It's narcissistic personalities. It's sociopathic kind of personalities. Well, not so much Kennedy, but with other people. And this includes Lyndon Johnson was that way. There's a chapter in the book on Lyndon Johnson that'll make your hair curl. You're like, this guy was insane, literally clinically insane on various levels of being diagnosed insane. But yet he was running the country. And so you have this, unfortunately, a lot of narcissistic, sociopathic, megalomaniac people tend to have power because that's their personality. And so now you have to look at that and say, wow, okay, how do we navigate that? It's not easy. And that's why we see all the problems we see in politics. And these people, you look at them and like, are they crazy? Like, seriously. I think, again, as objective thinkers, you look at on either side of the aisle, doesn't matter. And you're like, what is wrong with them? Aren't they supposed to be civil servants? Right? Didn't we elect them? Right? And you shake your head, and it's all about power and greed, So anyway, I don't want to digress too much into that, but that these are things that you have to consider when you look at history and why things happen the way they happen.
Yeah, I mean, politics is just, to me, it's just an illusion. If you throughout history, as long as there's been people who want to control those people, and the only difference between now and back then is that they've made it a little less obvious, and they've tricked more people into believing that their vote matters, and they trick people into. I mean, I've had Jack Abramoff on the show years ago. I think it was a really important episode because he was one of the most powerful lobbyists of all time and of doing time. There's two films about him, both named Casino Jack. One was a documentary, one was a HBO film, I believe, where Kevin Spacey played him. And really it showed the inner workings of lobbyists, of how, expose how all the politician really cares about is who's going to give them money. And if you give them money and you support them financially, they'll give you some language and say, here, put this in the bill. They won't even read it. They'll be like, okay, thank you. And it exposes how politicians spend way more time trying to get money to run again than they do actually like caring about social issues or reading bills or any of that stuff. And so by the time you become a president or any high ranked politician, like you understand the game, and you understand that like, okay, this game is, I promise things I probably know I can't, I'll never be able to give them, but it's all about getting votes. And then when they call me out on it, I'll just give them excuses on why, I didn't give them what they wanted, or why my thoughts have changed, or why I'm doing something else or whatever. And it's just this constant lying. And the thing about lying, I mean, if you talk to psychologists, they'll tell you like the more you do it, the easier it gets. And I think by the time, you're a high ranked politician, it doesn't affect you at all. There is no moral compass. They have smashed the moral compass and thrown it away. And so
Right.
I think that's what people have to understand, is that it really is. I've had Jesse Ventura on. He would always say, politics is pro wrestling, and he's had his foot in both worlds of pro wrestling and politics. He understands like there's a whole lot of similarities to this, where people get caught up in a storyline, people get caught up in a character. You decide who is the good guy and who is the bad guy, and you emotionally get invested in this storyline. And
Right.
and even like, and I always use the example. I'm like, you watch a movie, it's actors and actresses, it's all fake, it's special effects, that nobody's really getting hurt and nobody's really doing anything bad or good or whatever. But yet you get an emotional response and you root for somebody or you root against somebody. And politics is no different. Like, it almost seems like no matter how often you drill this point that it's just an illusion. Even the person you think you like because they're telling you the things they know you'll like. They have speech writers that know exactly how to phrase things and how to state things and how to mold this perspective that you'll enjoy and you'll buy into. And yet we still think like, yeah, I like that guy. Well, who that guy isn't, you'll never know. Like, you only see, it's no different than, like what young kids are dealing with today with like going on Instagram and everybody looks perfect and everybody looks like they're having the time of their lives. And you're like, how come I'm not having that life? And it's like, because they're only posting the best parts of their life, and it's like,
Right.
So that's what you think is reality when it's not. And so, yeah, this whole divide and conquer thing has been happening since the beginning of time. There's a great documentary by my good friend Richard Grove called State of Mind, The Psychology of Control. And it goes all the way back to, the beginning of civilizations, on how the elite and the empires and the imperialists have always controlled the rest. And our lives don't matter. We're peasants. We're pawns on a board. And we're just used in the greater game of control and power. And if some of us die, who cares? And that's really their mindset.
It is. And by the way, I'd love to watch that documentary. That sounds fascinating. And it's things like that could really inform a lot of people to make them understand that. And it's true. I agree with you totally. Couldn't have said it any better, really. I mean, we're tribal by nature. So we're always going to take a side. We always feel like we have to. We have our favorite sports teams, right? So, and people literally get into fistfights at football games because they're in the other tribe, right? So the tribes are fighting at football games. This is how we are as humans. And we're like that with politics. And I feel like it's so hard. I don't have the answers to it, but I've been trying to say, as it relates to the JFK assassination, and what I've learned from that is that we have to somehow stop that. But we have to do it. We have to first do it in our own minds. We have to change our paradigms and not get triggered by things that are obviously really not that important in the grand scheme of what's really going on. And I don't know exactly how that paradigm shift occurs, but I feel like, and it's probably harder than ever now because there's just so much information out there. What do you listen to? What do you read? What do you watch? Right. But somehow we have to try to rise above it. And I don't know if there's a paradigm shift that occurs, and once a certain number of us reach that and are able to have that shift in our thinking, that all of a sudden things start to change a little bit. I don't know. People always ask me, what's the future? What do we do? Is there hope? Or is this Kennedy assassination, things like that, just going to constantly happen? We're never going to find out the truth about that after all these years. And there's just going to be more and more of it, more corruption, right? More of this, more. And I say, I don't have an answer. I wish I could come out and say, oh, we can overcome it. We can, because we have the numbers. But they are very good at understanding how human beings think, and how most human beings don't care as much. And especially if they're distracted with paying bills, right? And the cost of living and inflation and healthcare costs and not being able to afford a house, even though both spouses work. So that's a distraction. And then add to that the distraction of idolization, movie stars, celebrities, athletes. Who has time for the Kennedy assassination? And that they know what they're doing. And I think if we keep doing what we're doing, that if everyone does their own little part, that maybe that will make a difference. And that's why I wrote the book. I said, let me just do my little part in this. It's this one book. It's one book in thousands of books about JFK and the assassination. But my hope is that if people read it, they'll be sparked in a way that compels them to start thinking more critically of everything, and maybe taking a stand, maybe having that courage that JFK had. And that was the ultimate courage to do some of the things that he did, knowing there was a possibility, at least, they were going to kill him. He had to have known that. So that's my hope anyway.
Yeah, and I think the three great events of 9/11, JFK assassination, and COVID, I think every event opened up the eyes of a whole new generation of people who are starting to realize that the world isn't exactly the way it seems. And a lot of these, what were alternative perspectives and views and researchers and stuff, have now become mainstream. And a lot of things that were considered conspiracy theories are now becoming things that people believe a lot more. I mean, you look at the Jeffrey Epstein thing. I've had Nick Bryan on the show, and I've done plenty of shows down that rabbit hole of this Franklin scandal and Jeffrey Epstein and people in the in the elite of Hollywood, in politics, in fashion. A lot of really disturbing things happening, and at the time it was like, no, this is too crazy to believe that it could be true. And then it becomes mainstream, and people, but it almost seems like even the Georgia Guidestones, like the fact that now this idea of depopulation, of a elite having a worldview of how the world should be, and trying to mold the world in their image and how they want it, seems to be much more digestible for the average person, that they're like, you know what? The Guidestones says too much of our plan. And before, people just laughed at it and didn't really believe what was written here and never took it seriously. And now, because of all the events that have happened in recent history and people waking up quicker and quicker and more, now we have to kind of like get rid of some evidence that there is a elite who have a worldview that they're trying to influence to create. And so maybe there is some hope. Maybe that is a sign of things going in a positive direction.
Yeah, and it could be a metaphysical thing where we evolve. We finally get to a point where we evolve into the next step of our human evolution, and it's almost like a higher vibrational. We become higher vibrational. I know that that's metaphysical, but maybe that's what's going to happen. I've done documentaries on ET disclosure, and UFO phenomena and all the cover up with that, and maybe it's going to take ET interference, right, where they come down and they're like, okay, enough of this nonsense. I don't know, but we have to try to do our part, I agree. When I'll never forget the first time I read "Behold a Pale Horse." I don't know if you're probably familiar with that book. Scared me to death because it was one of the first books I ever read on this idea of an Illuminati or a New World Order. But basically, what it was is a powerful cabal of people controlling everything, and their family bloodlines do indeed go way back, and they've always been controlling everything. It's creepy, right? And it's really horrifying to read about that. But like you said, all of a sudden it's like, well, yeah, that makes sense. Listen, the Bilderberg group, we know now it exists. They meet once a year. You can't get close to it, right? It's the security is ridiculous. What do they talk about? And they talk about how are they going to continue to rule the world? Literally, these are the most powerful people in the world discussing how they're going to continue to rule the world. They're the puppet masters. They're the ones pulling the strings. It's right there in front of us. It's right there for us to see, right? It's right there for us to read or hear, or you have these whistleblowers come out and say, hey, I was with the, Air Force, or I was with the CIA, or I was with the NSA, and it's bad, and then they either get discredited or they disappear. So what are we to do? And again, I say this, and this ties into JFK assassination. It really does. We're not off topic here because this is all the same thing we're talking about here. And when we talk about I can't tell you how horrified I was learning about some of the people with power back in 1963, that these people were trained. They were specialists in assassination, in psyop, psychological warfare, and they ran the CIA. They had very high levels on the CIA, and they learned a lot of this mind control. MK Ultra was very real, and they knew how to do it, and they did it. They did it to the Vietnamese. They did it to Koreans. They were doing it all over Southeast Asia. That was their modus operandi. They knew how to do it. And when you realize that they were doing this and not caring how many civilians and innocent people died in these wars, you don't think they're going to take out Kennedy? They won't think twice about it, and they didn't. Now, and it's scary.
And obviously, I'm sure doing so much research on these topics, you've almost become an expert in cover-ups. What in government, especially specifically government cover-ups, what's your opinion on the disclosure and all the governments coming out and now admitting that they have Pentagon secret programs, that they're taking these things seriously? Is it a psyop? Because I mean, the thing about the alternative media world is that in psyops, there's psyops, and then there's more psyops. So you never know what's the psyop, right? And it's just
right.
It gets difficult. What's your opinion? Because the government is now openly discussing it, does it make it less believable?
There's disinformation too, right? What do you believe? So the history of it, I say the modern era of UFO sightings, as we all know it, started right after World War II, and that's not an accident, because basically we dropped the bombs on Japan, and once we dropped those nuclear bombs, it got someone's attention. Let's just put it that way. But there's been things happening since, in this modern era of UFO sightings, abductions, all these things that are happening to all these people. It's the same modus operandi, right? Discredit people, make it a joke, Have you ever seen a mainstream media station, not alt, mainstream media anchor that hasn't giggled or laughed when they've talked about a UFO? And that's on purpose because they want it to seem ridiculous. But now what are we learning? Right? Science, technology. It's like, oh yeah, quantum physics is a real thing. We can bend space and time. There are different dimensions. They're not just 4 or 5 dimensions. There's 13 dimensions. We're learning all these things, right? The Drake equation tells us that objectively, there's probably hundreds of thousands of advanced civilizations just maybe in this galaxy or something like that. I mean, the universe is goes on and on forever. You can't even wrap how big the universe is around your head, how many planets and suns and solar systems and galaxies there are. So of course there's going to be intelligent life on a lot of these planets. But what I think, so they've had this cover up, discredit campaign going on since the 1940s. They didn't want us to know about it because they didn't think we can handle it. And with the Cold War, I get that there was national security involved and they had to be real careful about it. So now they're coming out all of a sudden and they're spoon feeding these stories. Oh yeah, the Pentagon came out with these are real. They're literally telling us now UFOs do exist. They're not from here. They're not earthbound. 2 things. A, barely any coverage. B, no one cares. No one cares. We're just flabbergasted by this. It's like, wait a minute, how could, I'm not saying no one cares, but most people are, again, so preoccupied with the Kardashians or whatever they're preoccupied with that they were just told that UFOs are not earthbound craft. They're ET. What? Do you know how important that is to mankind? And this is how we are now. And you're right, though, to your point. The government and the people who have covered this up for as long, and it's world governments, it's not just the US. There's other governments who have covered this up in league with the United States. How do they explain the last 60 years of cover up, intimidation, people going missing? I mean, really, there's a lot of the same things with the JFK assassination as far as people who were in the wrong place at the wrong time, knew things they shouldn't know, saw things they shouldn't have seen, and then they're gone. They disappear. There was a lot of threats that happened in every one of these cases, whether it was Roswell, people were threatened with their lives. And don't talk about it. Well, why? So is the government really going to be able to come out now and say, oh, hey, yeah, by the way, ETs exist. There are 27 different races. They're part of this galactic community, this federation. And by the way, now we can become part of it. And, but forgive us for the last 60 years or 70 years, 80 years. It was national security. We had to cover it up. It's the same thing with the JFK assassination. Is the CIA going to come out now and say, yeah, we had some rogue elements that were involved in the Kennedy assassination. Sorry. Those people might be dead, but the institution still exists. So there's answering that needs to happen there, right? Someone's got to be held responsible for that kind of thing. So I don't know. I tell people, are we the disclosure that we go out and do the work and do the research and have our own experiences and then say, I know for sure that ETs exist because blankety, blankety, blank. So I don't need the government to tell me whether there's life on other planets. And I don't need the government to tell me that the JFK assassination was a major conspiracy. I don't need them to tell me anything because I do my own work. And that's what we have to do. That's what we have to do. And then get to a point where we're all talking about this, right? I think it's really cool. We're talking about the JFK assassination and you bring that up because there are a lot of similarities in that idea of cover up. The fact that we're not worthy, we can't handle it. We can't handle certain truths. We're babies, we're children. And only the elites and the people in power have a right to know whether a UFO crashed in Roswell in 1947. The rest of us have no right to know that. Well, guess what? That insults my intelligence in a major way. And I'm the kind of person, I'm going to write books about it. And I'm going to make documentaries about it because you're not getting one over on me. And I know you feel the same way.
Well, I think you made a really important point in regards to why they don't declassify the JFK assassination documents, because people constantly say, "Oh, well, all those people are gone, or most of them are dead, or whatever." But like you said, the really important part is the institutions still exist. So if you uncover the fact that the CIA is corrupt, it could lead to now, looking into the CIA and what they're doing right now. It could lead to many other things. So I think that's a really important part. It's not the fact that like some of those people are still alive and we'll get justice by putting them in prison, but it's about the fact that what you do, you expose the fact that the whole system is corrupt, and that there's things that we should be doing now in regards to kind of fixing the system. And that's not what they want happening. They want people to just think that no, that was a long time ago, everything's good now. The CIA is not as corrupt as all those conspiracy theorists say that they are, and there is no shadow government, there is no Illuminati, there is none of these things. And the Bilderberg Group, oh yeah, that's just a bunch of rich people getting together and just kind of having tea and coffee and just hanging out. And so without a doubt. And well, I've taken up a lot of your time, and I know you're a very busy man who's doing a lot of interviews. It's always a pleasure having you on and discussing this topic and all the topics we dive into. Where can listeners get your work, keep up with your work, keep up with your documentaries, your books, everything and anything? Let people know how they stay in touch.
Yeah, thanks. Appreciate that. Well, I have an author site, so it's jackrothauthor.com. And on there are links to Amazon, Barnes and Noble, all the major booksellers, and you can get Killing Kennedy there, as well as my other book that's still in print. And then also the documentaries that we do are on there, so you can see a lot of the work we do on that. And also for the book, Amazon, really, I tell people, Barnes and Noble as well, but just go to Amazon and type in Killing Kennedy by Jack Roth, because there are 2 Killing Kennedys. I have to tell people that. But yeah, it's easy to find, and you can get it that way.
Awesome. Well, I'll have to have you. I think I've emailed you before, but if not, I'll definitely do it again. I do host another show called the Union of the Unwanted. I don't know if you've ever heard of it, but it's a great panel show where we have a bunch of thinkers and podcasters and researchers all come together, and we just bounce ideas and opinions and research off each other, and it's always a blast. I host it with Charlie Robinson from Macroaggressions, Sam Tripoli from the Tinfoil Hat podcast, and Midnight Mike from the OBDM show, and they're just a blast of chats and episodes, and I'll definitely have to keep you in the loop in regards to hopefully have you on a future episode. But keep up the amazing work. I'm sure we'll chat again in the near future, and I definitely love to have you on to specifically talk about the UFO thing, and maybe do a whole deep dive into that whole topic and your research and thoughts and opinions on everything that's going on now, and maybe even historically. So keep up the amazing work, Jack, and I'll send you links to the show once it's up and live. And thanks again for taking the time to chat.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I had a lot of fun. Always good to talk to you.
Thanks, I appreciate it. Enjoy the rest of your day, and we'll talk soon.
Yeah, you too.
Take care.